He called the black man preacher boy and slapped the Bible out of his hands in the crowded chow hall. The room laughed, then went quiet when the sirens wailed and the lights died. Seconds later, they learned who he really was, and that was the moment justice began. The insult landed before the tray did. A steel pan of meatloaf hit the floor with a wet slap, and gravy bled across the painted concrete like a slow river. Forks froze midair, heads turned, and the hum of 1,000 small conversations buckled under the sound of one big laugh. The man who'd made the mess, broad-shouldered, freckled, a lightning bolt tattoo peeking up from his collar, spread his arms like he just told the funniest joke in America. "Pick it up, preacher boy," he said. "You drop, you mop." The black man he was talking to didn't wear a collar. He didn't wear chains either, at least not the kind you could see. His hands were steady. His eyes were steady. He knelt to lift the fallen Bible first, like it weighed more than the tray. "Leave it," someone from a nearby table called. "He ain't got a God in here." The big man, everyone knew him as Red, stepped closer. He used a boot sole to slide the Bible another inch across the floor, then set the heel on it like a badge. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Pray me into manners." The man with the calm eyes looked up. He said, voice soft as felt, "But I'll remember your name." Laughter spat against the cinder block walls. A guard by the door raised his chin and didn't move. The Chow Hall at Greystone Correctional was trained to enjoy a scene and trained even better to pretend it didn't. The calm-eyed man rose with the book to his chest and brushed the gravy off its edge with the sleeve of a gray sweatshirt and held Red's gaze like it was a window, and there was weather on the other side. They had no idea who he really was. His name was Isaiah Reed, and the lines on his hands told more truth than any ID card. He wore a wedding band smooth thin as a river stone, a watch that kept perfect time, and a voice that could lower the temperature of a room without raising a single hair. He'd come to Greystone through 2 metal detectors and 3 locked doors, not as a visitor and not yet as a friend. On the logbook, he was program volunteer, which is a way a place like that says, "We'll let you in if you promise to leave before midnight." Isaiah knew midnights. He'd sat with them on hospital floors, nursing homes, back seats of cars that trembled with what couldn't be said. For 20 years, he'd pastored a little church by the river in a town that had more grain silos than stoplights. He was the kind of man who taped prayer cards to the inside of his coat and never forgot which pocket held which name. He'd come to Greystone because the warden had finally said yes to a restorative justice pilot. A circle in a room without corners, a place where men removed from the world might practice returning to it. Isaiah had asked to start small, quiet. "Let me walk the yard first," he'd told the warden. "No collar, no stage. I want to hear the place before I try to speak to it." So he wore what the men wore, ate what they ate, waited in line where they waited. He listened to the low river of jokes and grief and the kind of boasting that lives only where hope is rationed. And when they mocked him, he took it the way he took weather, fully, without flinching, convinced that storms pass quicker when you name them true. He didn't tell them he had buried sons that hadn't belonged to him and married couples that barely belonged to each other. He didn't tell them the warden had quietly put him on a crisis response list because Isaiah had a way of making fires smaller. He didn't tell them that once, long ago, in a chaplain's uniform, he'd prayed over men in a sand-blown tent while a generator coughed behind him, and the night outside trembled with a different kind of siren. Instead, he kept his eyes steady, and when the chow hall laughter found him, he let it roll off the book he carried like rain off a roof. He stayed calm because calm was his only honest sermon. He stayed because leaving would teach the wrong lesson. And he stayed because he knew something about Red that Red didn't know he was telling. Men who laugh that loud are often drowning the noise of their own fear. Red didn't leave it at meatloaf. Bullies never do. 2 days later, he found Isaiah in the corridor leading to E-block classrooms, where a handful of men signed up for a course called Story and Truth. Isaiah had written the title on the whiteboard in small letters, like he didn't want to scare it. "Preacher Boy's running school now," Red said, blocking the doorway with two friends wide as lockers. "Teach us how to cry into our cornflakes?" A guard leaned by, another looked away. Isaiah kept his hands visible, palms open, like a man showing his tools before he works. "We're telling our stories," he said. "You're welcome to come in." Red smiled, and the smile looked like a switchblade. "I got a story," he said. "Once upon a time, a man came into a place he didn't belong, and the wolves ate him because that's what wolves do." "You're not wolves," Isaiah said, not unkindly. "You're men." That earned him a shoulder check, the kind designed to be just under the line where paperwork starts. Isaiah took a step back. The men inside, skin inked with sagas, eyes too old to be that young, watched like they'd paid expensive tickets. Red's second man, a shaved head with a scar that looked like punctuation, picked up Isaiah's Bible from the desk and flipped it one-handed. "Say something from your magic book," he said. He found a page at random and read, lips twisting as if the words were bad meat. "Turn the other cheek," he quoted, then barked a laugh so hard it startled himself. Isaiah took the book back and closed it gently, as if sound might wake something you didn't want waking. "That line," he said, "is less about being hit and more about choosing who you are after. It's about not letting someone else write your name for you." Scar laughed again, but it was thinner this time, like the joke had been used too much and the blade had dulled. Red leaned in close enough that Isaiah could smell tobacco and something sweet, like cough syrup. "You keep your name," Red said. "I'll write your ending." Behind Red, thunder talked to the far hills. Around here, storms dragged their feet like old men. The sky went from indifferent to iron. Lights flickered, once, twice, then held. The PA system crackled awake to remind everyone of something nobody listened to. Red jabbed a finger at Isaiah's chest. "Tomorrow," he said, "Chow Hall, noon, you say grace in front of my table, loud. Make me believe you believe it, or—" He let the empty part hang there. Empty parts are where fear grows best. Isaiah met his eyes and didn't blink. "Tomorrow," he agreed, and the men in the room remembered later how the thunder rolled like a drum roll and how stupid it was, and how perfect. Noon came sooner than dignity. The chow hall trembled with forks and opinions. Rain lashed the long windows like 1,000 small hands. Sirens in the yard rose and fell, counting seconds in a language of their own. Red sat at his table like a king with a cheap crown, two men on either side, an emptiness in front of him where the tray belonged. Isaiah walked in with his book under his arm, and that same even walk, a man who'd learned to carry himself because too often he'd had to carry others. He stopped 3 steps from Red's table. "Say it," Red said. "Make it pretty." Isaiah bowed his head. He did not make it pretty. He made it plain. "Lord," he said, soft enough that men leaned forward to hear, and in leaning forgot to laugh, "teach us to be hungry for the right things." That's when the lights died. A sound rose from the building like an animal. The generator coughed and choked and went quiet. Doors that were supposed to lock didn't. Doors that were supposed to open wouldn't. The siren outside went steady and stayed that way. In the half-dark, the chow hall was a ship that realized all at once how far out it had sailed. Guards barked orders, radios hissed into static. Somewhere down the corridor, a man shouted for help with the chest of another man, and the echo made it sound like the whole prison was asking. Isaiah didn't move for a heartbeat, which is longer than it sounds. Then he moved like he'd been waiting under the surface of this moment for hours. He turned to the nearest guard, a woman with an expression like a locked drawer. "You have a crash cart?" he asked. "Medical's down the hall," she said, breath thin. "Doors are jammed." "Keys?" Isaiah asked. "On the dead panel," she said, as if she didn't mean the second word. Isaiah placed his book in Red's empty tray, then stepped onto the bench, then the table, and raised his voice with the authority of a bell. "Listen," he said. "We do this together. Table by table, slow, no pushing. If you can see, guide. If you can't, hold. If you hear someone fall, make space for air." He sounded like he belonged. He sounded like a man who'd been here all his life and all of theirs too. The room, shocked into a kind of silence, obeyed. Men shambled in orderly lines that looked like this place had practiced kindness when no one was watching. Isaiah climbed down, took the guard's flashlight, and let a small river of breath and muscle into the corridor. At the first jammed door, he put his shoulder to it and didn't pretend his strength was enough. "You," he said to a man whose neck tattoo was a love letter, "and you, help me." They braced the hinge. Someone wedged a mop handle into the seam. The door sighed and gave, like a stubborn story that finally admits it has a point. Inside, a young inmate lay on the floor, lips the color of rain. A guard knelt by him, counting, then miscounting, then starting again. Isaiah slipped beside him, checked the airway, put 2 fingers exactly where they needed to be. "I need compressions," he said, and a man whose fists had spent years telling the wrong truth began to press with a rhythm older than his rage. 1, 2, 3. Isaiah counted, voice even, as if he were reading a bedtime story to a storm. The boy gulped air like a man who'd forgotten he needed it. Someone cried without embarrassment. The guard swallowed a sob and turned it into a laugh, because sometimes joy has to sneak past fear in a disguise. Red stood in the doorway, caught between scorn and something he couldn't name. Isaiah turned to him. "Find the breaker room," he said, "and tell whoever's there to listen for me." He spoke like he expected obedience. He spoke like Red was capable of it. "Why me?" Red asked, reflex more than question. "Because you're the only man here loud enough to be heard," Isaiah said. Red went. Down the corridor, the generator wheezed, then steadied like a horse taking the bit. Lights flickered and chose the living. The PA system coughed. A voice, the warden's, came soft through bad speakers. "All units, remain in place. Crisis protocol phase 2. And then the warden's voice changed shape. "Chaplain Reed," it said, "if you can hear this, report to the control room." 100 heads turned to Isaiah like iron to a magnet. Red stopped mid-step, expression rearranging itself. In the glove of light that returned, Isaiah no longer looked like a man who needed permission to be here. He looked exactly like what he was. He wiped his hands on his sweatshirt, picked up his book from Red's tray, and set a steady course for the control room. Greystone's control room was a ship's bridge without windows. Monitors bloomed and dimmed as power fought for purchase. The warden stood with a headset and a prayer he hadn't admitted to saying out loud. When Isaiah entered, he nodded like relief felt formal here. "Chaplain," the warden said, "I need your eyes and your voice." "Say what you need," Isaiah replied. There were 3 problems, stacked like bad brickwork. A lock on C block that refused to engage, leaving a stairwell exposed. A medical supply cabinet stuck behind an electronic latch, and panic creeping through the system like ivy through a fence. Isaiah took the radio. He breathed once, twice. Then he spoke with that bell tone again. "Greystone," he said, "this is Chaplain Reed. Listen for instructions, then pass them along. We do this together." He parceled tasks. He deputized men like they'd been waiting their whole lives for someone to trust them with something that mattered. He sent 2 of Red's crew to stabilize the stairwell with a guard who knew their names. He asked Scar, a man who had scoffed scripture, to use those same careful hands to trip the emergency release on the med cabinet with a bent paperclip and patience. He assigned the young ones to carry blankets and the old ones to count heads. He did not make speeches. He made requests that sounded like compliments. Red became a messenger whose feet learned urgency without learning haste. He ran. He returned. He repeated, word perfect, as if something inside him loved precision and had been starving for it. By late afternoon, the storm had exhausted its appetite. The generator found its rhythm. Doors remembered their jobs. Men sagged onto benches and against walls, not from defeat, but from the kind of relief that feels like surprise. The chow hall smelled like rain and second chances. And then came the reckoning. The warden gathered the men who had turned the tide, guards with exhausted eyes, inmates with hands that still shook, and Red, who hovered like he wasn't sure which group he belonged to. In front of everyone, the warden faced Isaiah. "Chaplain Reed," he said, and it made a few heads tilt because no one had said the word out loud in the chow hall before. You saved a life today, and likely more than one. Isaiah shook his head. We saved each other, he said. I only reminded the room it knew how. The warden nodded, then turned to Red. The room flinched because they'd seen discipline delivered enough to anticipate the shape, but the warden's voice went quiet instead. Murdoch, he said, using Red's name like a man testing its fit, I saw you follow orders today from a man you mocked yesterday. I saw you run messages like they were oxygen. I saw you choose the kind of strength that doesn't need a fist to be believed. Red's throat worked once. He said nothing. There'll be a disciplinary hearing, the warden continued, for the chow hall incident. It matters how we treat each other when we think no one's watching. But I'm adding a condition I don't usually add. Mandatory attendance in Chaplain Reed's Restorative Circle. 6 weeks. You'll speak, you'll listen, and you'll be heard. Refusal will cost you your privileges. Participation may earn you back what you've thrown away. A murmur traveled the room. Not laughter, not groans. Something like interest, cautious and human. Red's jaw flexed like he was chewing a word before he risked saying it. Isaiah stepped forward, book in hand, not as shield, but as witness. He met Red's eyes and didn't look away. I'll be there, he said, every week, not to forgive you cheap and not to punish you slower, to ask you to tell the truth and to sit with it long enough to know what it asks of you. Red swallowed. Something like a nod arrived on his face and stayed. For the first time since anyone could remember, the chow hall applauded, not wildly, not like a circus, but like church when the hymn ends and no one wants to be the first to break the good silence. That night, in his tiny office, Isaiah peeled off his wet sweatshirt and wrote names on prayer cards until his hand cramped. He wrote Red's twice. He wrote the boy who'd taken air again. He wrote the guard who looked away and then looked back. He wrote the warden who had remembered there are ways to win that don't make someone else lose. The storm had left a gift behind, a room that had seen itself. Weeks later, the circle met in a classroom whose windows opened on a narrow slice of sky. Men sat in hard chairs and didn't pretend it was comfortable. On the whiteboard, someone had erased story and truth and replaced it with nothing we can't carry together, because sometimes a sentence has to be heavy before it does its work. Red spoke in the 4th week. It came out crooked at first, stopping and starting like a car nobody had driven in years. He didn't say the words anyone thought they were owed. He didn't say he'd been taught to hate or that he'd been taught to fear, though both sat beside him like old friends. He didn't say he was sorry and expect the room to applaud. He said this: I thought being a man meant taking something from somebody else. I thought respect came from making someone smaller than me. But when the lights went out, I did what he told me, and it didn't feel like losing. Isaiah nodded and let the silence hold that without dropping it. He turned to the rest of the men. What did you hear? He asked. They heard the same thing, translated through the grammar of their scars, that a man can change the shape of his power without losing it, that a room can practice justice without a judge present, that dignity is not a limited resource you can hoard. When the program ended, there were certificates printed on paper too thin to matter, and a tray of cookies that tasted like sugar and apology. Red didn't take a certificate. He took a chair beside the door and held it while others walked through, like he wanted to feel the hinge give under 100 different weights. Make no mistake, Greystone did not turn into a church or a classroom where the light hums just right and the thermostat works. It stayed what it had been, a place for men who had harmed and been harmed, a place where gravity is stronger than it should be. But it also became, in corners and corridors and the space between one heartbeat and the next, a place where respect could root. I'll tell you what I told my grandsons, and you can take it with your coffee or leave it on the table for someone with emptier hands. Respect doesn't come from titles. It doesn't come from who gets to shout the loudest when the room is dark. Respect is how you carry your name through a storm, and how you treat the names around you when you think no one's taking notes. Justice isn't always a gavel. Sometimes it's a man with steady hands counting compressions in a dim hallway. Sometimes it's a warden remembering mercy has a spine. Sometimes it's a bully learning that strength and cruelty are not the same word, and that one of them will always be easier and cheaper than the other. They mocked his faith until the storm hit. And when the lights came back, they learned what faith is when it isn't a word. A lamp you pass hand to hand, an old song hummed under your breath, a decision you make about who you'll be when no one could blame you for being less. That was the moment justice began. And if we're lucky, if we're stubborn, it's the moment we keep choosing, day after day, even when there's no storm to blame and no siren to tell us when to start.